All right. Well, allegedly the screen is up. If anybody wants to confirm, I mean, I'm pretty confident about, well, hang on a second. I got to make sure Instagram comes up. That's a manual step. There we go. No, because the breeze coming in is nice.
The speakers might go. No, I hear you. Okay, I'm allowed somewhere.
Neat. So for our online audience, if you can't tell, we're making this part up because we're accustomed to streaming stuff, but not so much while trying to do other things. Usually the stream is like the thing we're doing, but so welcome anyone who's joining us online from Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I'm like, what's the other one? Feel free to join in. I have a handout here. You don't get one. Sorry, it's not like a downloadable link, but there. This is just. I could make a PDF. I considered doing it, but I didn't. Considered it, but I just didn't. Essentially, this was just my own notes of what I was going to cover, and I decided I might as well give it to you guys too. But people online can tell by the stream title, it's Gospel of John. This is what we're jumping into. And so before we do, let's just go ahead and pray. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity to get here together and to just take some time simply opening your word, seeing what it's got to show us. And I pray that you will reveal to us just some of the glory that's so special about your word. These things that it's not just another book. It's not like any book. It's this living, timeless thing that can speak into our reality exactly where we are today. And just let it do exactly that. I pray that your word will serve its purpose and show us our next step. Amen. So, initially for this Bible study, the first thing we're going to do is just look into the Gospel of John. And since nobody had the opportunity to go ahead and read in advance and prepare for it, this week is an introduction to just the overall Gospel of John. Katie, you've got 2 pages. They're both the same.
I know.
but today we're just going to be looking at sort of an overview of the whole book. I don't even like really using the term, I don't know. I call it by a dozen different things. I'll probably call it a letter at some point, even though it's really not in terms of like the genre of the writing and stuff. But just some interesting things about this before we get into the book itself. So John, the person, because John, there was never a single doubt about who wrote this gospel, who wrote this book of John. The first time it was ever questioned was in the 1700s. So it made it like a good long time before anyone was like, are you sure it was John? It's like, we've been sure for over 1,000 years. Yes, everybody, like the people who knew John, the people who were like studied under him, had his writing, like had the physical copies of things that he wrote, like that everybody knew this was John. And there's a lot of stuff from like the 2nd century. I don't have it in here. It's something I've been researching for my podcast, but like a lot of the historical evidence for that John, like that what we have now is what it originally was. It hasn't been altered and grown with legend over time or anything, and that it was written by John, the person we think it is. Like there's a lot of stuff from the church fathers, the people in the first like 200 years of Christianity, and their letters and journal entries and letters to each other and stuff, that there's a lot of evidence that survives through history of who this guy John is. And so, neat thing about John among the disciples is there's a lot of scholars think that he may have been related to Jesus, might have been like a cousin or something. There, obviously, there's nothing directly in scripture that says, and John, his, second cousin on his mother's side, or doesn't say anything like that. But there's some stuff in there. There's part of specifically when Jesus is on the cross and looks to John and basically tells him to take care of Jesus' mother from now on. That's something that would happen with a close relative. And there's some other things that we'll see as we go through of John was distinctly closer with Jesus. John is the only one who tells us about Jesus' life for 3 years. The other Gospels just give us the last year of his life. So John was with Jesus closer and for a longer time. And like people think that he may have actually been related. Whether he was related or not doesn't really matter, but it's neat. We do know that he was the last surviving apostle. He wrote Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and Revelation. It's, which emperor was it? I don't think it was Nero. It might have been Domitian. Doesn't matter. One of the Roman emperors. John was the last one still alive, and they sentenced him to be executed because he wouldn't stop talking about Jesus, which is how the rest of them got killed. He was boiled in oil, and John, according to the stories, again, some of the stuff from the church fathers, it's not in scripture, but story goes that John sat there in the boiling oil, unharmed by it, and like preached from the oil, which freaked everybody out because you're supposed to be screaming and dying. And he just sat in there continuing to share the message of Jesus, preaching to the executioners. And so and so the emperor kind of panicked, said, I don't know how to kill this guy, and took him and shoved him over on an island. He was exiled to the island of Patmos. And it's like, you go over there. And I don't know how that exile worked. Like, clearly he wasn't just put on a rocky island completely by himself, or he probably would have starved to death or something. Although this is the guy that survived being boiled in oil, so he could have survived that. But I'm not sure how exile to Patmos worked. I know John wasn't the only guy that had that. That was one of the part of their punishments that they used in the Roman Empire was exile. And so John got that. And it's like, we don't want to be anywhere near you. So they sent him away. But after the emperor died, John was released from exile, and he returned, and he ended his life at like over 100 years old as one of the bishops of the church at Ephesus. So like the book of Ephesians and stuff. And that's in his letters in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. That's some of what he's doing. That's him writing. Those are believed to be after he came back, or at least one of them. I don't know. There's, again, none of it is like signed and dated, so we don't know specifics and exactly, but it's just, John spent a long time. Many believe he was the youngest disciple. He also lived the oldest. So he had a long time of, telling the story of Jesus. What's up, dude?
I need more time for everything.
All right. Well, time out.
Go ahead.
You have to send a.
That's a commentary. One of my favorite things about Second John.
Okay, I got it.
This is not new. We're about what? We don't know. 80, 90 years, something like that.
Mhm.
It's somewhere in the realm of 50 to 100 years.
Yeah, it's
This isn't new.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
no, I want this to be not just me
Yeah.
like expounding my wisdom to you. That's not what I'm after here.
But you
Um,
got so much of it.
I-
We like it.
Just because I'm the nerd that researches this stuff and knows these things doesn't mean that I've got all the stuff to say. But, so what stuff that we'll see as we go through the book, but this page is a highlight. But it's
I don't think.
within his stuff from the gospel and to the letters, like how John shows up in his own gospel and in some of the others is he's one of the sons of thunder, him and his brother James. And like they got that name because these guys were basically loose cannons. They're the ones that when one town, Jesus was coming through and one town didn't want him there, they're like, hey, Jesus, should we call down fire on him and just destroy the whole town like Sodom and Gomorrah? And he's like, no, stop it. But like, this was John. This is how John started out. He was like this fire, like all about, like, okay, we're going to get, Jesus is powerful. We're going to like, we're kicking butt and taking names here. And, but then like over time, by the time he's writing his own gospel, and especially by the time he's writing the letters, he's known, again, in some of the church fathers, they call him the apostle of love. He's the love disciple, because that was so much his focus. That especially in 1 John, it's like all about that. If we love one another, and we love because he first loved us, and if we can see someone in need and not act, how can the love of the Father be in us? And all of these things, that just the power of Jesus' love for us and how it drives us to love one another. And it's his whole focus is love, which is funny from the Son of Thunder, who his focus was power and judgment. And it's John is the one who gives us in John 13:34, Jesus saying, a new command I give you, to love one another. It's I'm going to skip down to the last section in this, because it's my favorite thing about this. Is part of why I have recommended, like before I did this research and had this information, I have recommended people who are new to Bible study, new to reading the Bible on your own. For years, I've told people start with the Gospel of John. John is the most personal gospel. It actually says up there in the third category here, but it's John's gospel contains more direct quotations from Jesus than any other. It has so much of not only, yes, his public teaching, but so much of the things that were kind of behind closed doors with the disciples, with the inner circle, because John was one of those. There was the crowd that Jesus spoke to, and then there were his disciples, which was more than 12. There were at least 70 there, but there were it was a group of roughly 100 people that were considered his disciples. They were the fans of Jesus. That picture like a band on tour and the fans that follow them and tour with them. That was the disciples. And so that's this group that's following him around and listening to him and thinks that Jesus is amazing. Then there were his chosen ones, the apostles. That was the 12. They were the ones that he specifically worked with personally and poured into and counseled and led and taught them. But then among those 12, he had an inner group of 3. That there's quite a few times that you see Jesus do something and only take Peter, James, and John with him. And once or twice, only Peter. That it's just as it's drilling down into this tighter group, but John was part of the inner 3, and it's John and his brother James. It's interesting that James and John, the brothers, were in there. Peter had a brother, Andrew. Andrew wasn't part of the top inner circle. James and John, both the sons of thunder, were both in there. And it's kind of frustrating that, because you have the Gospel of Mark is from Peter's perspective. We have John. We don't have anything from James, because he was one of the first ones to be killed in the persecution in the Book of Acts. He was the first of the apostles to be executed. And so we don't have anything that he taught or wrote. But I wish we did. I'd love to be able to see it and have a comparison between James and John, because as brothers, they'd be very similar, but brothers always have different perspectives, and they were both there for so many of the same things. And if John was related, then James would have been also. And
I wonder if James would have been the disciple that Jesus loved more.
But you
Well-
think he thought so himself.
we'll get to that, because the whole thing of being the disciple Jesus loved, that it's a weird title to give yourself, but there's some really cool meaning to it.
Yeah, there-
Um, but the reason I've always recommended John is because, like I said, it's so personal. It shows you Jesus, the person. Jesus, as speaking from John, talking from the perspective of his direct relationship with Jesus. And it's that relationship that transformed John from being the son of thunder to the love disciple. And it's like there's so much of that. The way Jesus spoke and loved and cared for his disciples and taught them and guided them and was so patient, and they're doing stuff and they're like, should we call it on fire? It's like, no. And like working with them. And so there's so much of that in John. And so John to me is the best place to like be introduced to Jesus, to really get to know Jesus. And then from there, go to the other gospels to get like the fuller picture of what Jesus said and did and stuff. But that's why I'd like to start with John. But some of the really cool things, some of the excellent stuff for having John, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the synoptic gospels, which means like synoptic is like the same site. It basically, they are very, very similar to each other. They tell a lot of the same stories. They've got a lot of the same stuff. John is the divergent one. And it's called by, again, some of the church fathers call it the spiritual gospel, because the other ones were like a memoir of Jesus. And it's like, here's, he went here, he said this, he did that, these kind of things. John was really showing us like what was going on behind the scenes, what this stuff was about, what it meant, and Jesus revealing himself as God and his power and his love. And there's so much stuff that is unique to John that makes it like, there's unique stuff in all of them. But like if we didn't have Mark, we have 85% of what's in Mark between Matthew and Luke. But like if we didn't have John, there's so much that we don't have. And that's what this list is, just to kind of run through that. And it's, as you look at it, it's like almost every chapter. John 2 is the wedding at Cana, the turning water into wine. It's the very first miracle that Jesus did. No one else has that. John 3, the conversation with Nicodemus and the whole concept of being born again. And that's including John 3:16, the most famous verse in the world, but it's only in John. That conversation doesn't exist anywhere else. So that's chapter 2. Chapter 3, move to chapter 4, you get the woman at the well. Again, a story only in John. And this really highlights the inclusivity of the gospel, that this was Jesus like shattering barriers and going to not only a woman, but a Samaritan. And like it, was shocking. Go to chapter 5, you got healing this cripple who had been paralyzed for like 38 years at the pool of Bethesda. And that is such a strange contrast to chapter 4. That's the inclusivity of the woman at the well, because chapter 5, he heals this guy, and it causes a ruckus like so many things did, because he did it on the Sabbath like he so often did. But it's so weird that there were just a crowd of sick and lame and like all these disabled people there at the pool of Bethesda, and Jesus goes in and like finds the one guy and talks to him and heals him. There's a number of other occasions I'm not sure if there's any in John, I think there are, but specifically in Matthew and Mark, I know they have times that it's like that Jesus did something really cool, got people's attention, and like by nightfall, the entire town has shown up at the door, and they've brought every sick and demon possessed and any person who has any kind of ailment, they bring to Jesus, and he like heals all of them. But at the pool of Bethesda, he comes into a crowd of, this is like going into the hospital, going through the ICU and picking out one guy and heals him. It's a weird thing. But then you get to chapter 8, there's the woman caught in adultery. That's the famous, he who has no sin can throw the first stone. That's we only have that from John. Chapter 9, healing the man born blind, which was a big deal. It, like, from our perspective of like, oh, healing a blind guy or healing a person who became blind or healing a person who was born blind, to us, they're like, well, it's both. Blind can see now. But to them, like, that was next level craziness, because there had been miracles of someone regaining their sight, but there had never been such thing as a person born blind now able to see. And it brought about this whole thing, and it's one of my favorite stories in John, and I think it's hilarious. The whole thing that the poor guy who got healed gets like practically arrested for it, gets called in and has to defend himself, and like, how is it you can see? He's like, I don't know really. And chapter 11 is the raising of Lazarus, and that only shows up in John. That was actually one of the pieces that kind of caused some controversy with it. Like I said, in like the 1700s, when people are questioning, that they say, oh, I mean, this is just the stuff develops over years. And so like in the first one, Matthew, like, okay, there's a little girl who has died, and Jesus goes into the bedroom and wakes her back up. And it's like, she may or not even been dead. And then you get to Luke, and there's the widow's son who was like dead, and they're like in the funeral. So he's dead, that they're like on their way to bury him, and Jesus raises that guy. So it's a little bit more impressive. But then by the time you get to John, it's Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. And it's like, you see how this is just legends developing and growing over time. And it's like, no, that's not really what's happening. Like, people, the general consensus is that, and John even talks about it with Lazarus, that the same people who ended up killing Jesus were trying to kill Lazarus, because Lazarus, who everybody knew had been dead, now walking around alive, was a very uncomfortable thing for the people who didn't like Jesus and wanted to oppose him. And it's like, it's really hard to deny that that's the dead guy, and he's at our dinner. And like,
4 days is harder than
yeah, like, he was dead, he was buried, he was sealed in the tomb, and comes walking out. But I believe that by the time John wrote his gospel, because again, it was so much later than the others, it was a couple decades after Luke, and that Lazarus had died by then, and so John could go ahead and tell the story. The other guys didn't want to put the story in because Lazarus was already, like, you know, had a price on his head, basically. They were trying to eliminate him, and no one wanted to draw any extra attention to Lazarus. By the time John's writing, Lazarus is already dead, and he's like, okay, you know what? All bets are off. Let me tell you the greatest thing Jesus did. And he gives us that story. Like, half of John is the last few days of Jesus' life. And we get like 5 chapters of, like, from the night, the Last Supper through the crucifixion. There's like so much elaborate detail in this. And especially in from chapter 13 through 16 is the whole Last Supper, and so much teaching, things that Jesus shared and revealed in there that we don't have from anybody else. But that in itself is like the reason to read the book of John. But you get like Jesus washing the disciples' feet and teaching about the promising the Holy Spirit and the importance of the unity with Jesus' unity with the Father and our unity with him. And you get to chapter 17, which is, it's a weird thing. It's like a whole genre in and of itself, because it's the only thing in all of Scripture that is God talking to God. This is Jesus praying to the Father. And it's like nothing else is that anywhere. And so John 17 is like a unique thing in and of itself that, again, no one else has. The other Gospels tell us that Jesus went and prayed and like, Father, if possible, take this cup away from me, but not my will, but yours. And so they give us like a verse, a couple sentences, but John gives us this detailed prayer of what Jesus prayed, like for our unity, for his followers, like his disciples that he had then. And he says, everyone who will believe from or hear him from them, which is exactly how all of us ended up here. But Um, so all of that is just me nerding out on why I think John is really cool. I think John is very much worth reading, and it's just always been the most approachable of the Gospels to me. And so my question is, for starters, who here has read the entire Gospel of John?
99.5%.
Close enough. So, like,
I'm seeing so many things, like, here's one of the things that I had underlined, and this is so crazy, and I don't mean to bring anything into it.
just
But I will send you the advocate, the spirit of truth, and he will come to you from the Father, and he will testify all about me. And you must also testify about me because you've been with me from the beginning. But it says they will expel you from among them. They're not going to let you stay. But the ones who don't let you stay never knew him. And that is really heavy. It's just
I get it.
heavy.
Yeah.
Because
Just-
it's happened to me from the time I was 4 years old. It's not new.
By the way, anybody on the live stream, I don't know if you can hear anybody but me, because I'm wearing a microphone that's very like sound isolation. So I don't know if anyone else speaking can be heard. I honestly did that on purpose so that other people could feel free to talk who don't necessarily want to be on the live stream. You can speak up and it's okay. But so I'll have to like try to get in the habit of relaying to the online crowd anything that comes up in here. But the first sermon I ever preached was from John chapter 1. And so I'll be sharing some of that stuff. But it's 7 o'clock now, and I don't want to just take all of the time here just going through stuff. I want there to be, I'll probably go ahead and disconnect the live stream and turn into more just kind of roundtable discussion in the room, because that's part of what we're after here, and part of the value of gathering. That it's not just like you can sit in a church service and hear someone talk about things. You can get it from a podcast or whatever, but what you can't get in any of that is face to face with other people, and for each of us to be able to bring our own aspect to it. Like, that's why I'm saying I don't want to be the only one talking. I want more input and more perspective from people who have read it 100 times and from people who've never read it at all. We want to be able to get questions that we can come up. They can't see you, but
Stop it. No, stop.
but
I didn't say you're drinking.
Yeah.
but so my objective is to keep like the main okay, this is me sharing stuff part to about half an hour or so, maybe a little more, and because
We'll have to let them join in our shenanigans.
I'm planning to do like a chapter a week kind of a deal. And so your homework for next week is to read John chapter 1. And like, I'm not going to say you have to bring something, but like read John chapter 1. And if anything jumps out of like, that's cool, bring a note of that. Or if it's like, what in the world does this mean? If you've got questions, if there's notes, if it's just like, this is like my favorite, this is so cool that it says this, like whatever. But because I want to go through it together, I'll do just a little bit. We'll hit just the introduction of John for today, because this is something that, I mean, maybe I'm late to the party. Maybe other people have seen this forever, but I just recently connected these dots. So if we look at John 1:1, it says, "In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. And so it starts out with this poetic section. Like in my Bible, it's indented differently, as this is clearly like in verse. This isn't just telling a story. I, who knows? Maybe in Aramaic it rhymed, but it's well known that this is a parallel to Genesis 1:1. That is, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and this is, in the beginning the Word already existed. Like, simply by starting out with "in the beginning," there is no one in his audience that wasn't connecting those dots. But the thing that I only like sometime this year recognized and put together is like in verse 4 here, that it's the Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. But just this idea of light, that if we again go back to Genesis 1, that it's famously the first thing God does is Genesis 1:3. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. He separated the light from the darkness and called the light day and the darkness night. But what's interesting to me is, and again, I'm not the first person to recognize that God did that on day 1, and it's not till day like what 4 that he creates the sun. So it's like he created light, but what is the light, and what's this light coming from? And I think that what we're getting from John, and we'll see as we go through, John talks a lot about light, and Jesus saying, like, "I am the light of the world," and that the light he's talking about is not photons. It's not light bulb or sunshine light. It's like, this is not visible spectrum, I don't think. I mean, maybe that's a piece of it, but it's definitely so much more than just visible light. And when he's saying light, like Jesus talks about that while I am with you, you're in the light. And like, when it's light, you can walk and not trip over things, and you can see what you're doing, and it's like, but when I'm gone, it's darkness. And clearly it's not like, oh yeah, and the sun went out when Jesus left. No, like, we still have visible light, but it's, what he's talking about is like, I wish we had another word for it, but it's like spiritual light kind of thing. That it's this light that's what you see on the very beginning of creation, that God says, "Let there be light," and it's, let there be this thing of like awareness of God's presence or something. I don't know. We don't have another word but light, but I need something for it. But it's like God himself is light. I mean, it says elsewhere, I think it's in 1 John, he says God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Or is that James? I don't know. But there's this light is not a visible light thing, but it's the light. It's using the metaphor because it's light is how we see things, and it's the light by which we can read, by which we can tell what's going on and see where to walk without running into each other and stuff. And yeah, that, like, illumination, it's the ability to see, and like the light of Jesus is the ability to like see ourselves, to see the stuff that's like beneath the surface, the things that are what's going on inside of me, and what is happening, because we are not just like light is a part of the physical reality, so are we, but we are more than just physical creatures. We're spiritual. And so it's like this light is in that aspect, and it's revealing the things that are deeper than like biology and chemistry. And so it's just, I believe that he's introducing Jesus as that light, and tying back to the light, and this distinction between, yes, like God created the sun, moon, and stars and light in that sense, but long before that, he created light and made a distinction between light and darkness. And there's a lot of that that comes in John's writing. That's the distinction between the light and dark. But but and just for a fun tidbit, if you ever have Jehovah's Witnesses come to your door, take them to this part of the beginning of John chapter 1, because their Bible says, yes, instead of saying the Word was with God and the Word was God, they stuck in just a single letter and it says the Word was a God, which changes it. But it's fine. Let them change it. They forgot to change verse 3. And that says God created everything through him and nothing was created except through him. And so it's like, if you're trying to say that, like, oh, he's a God, he's not like the God, he's one of the created other things. It's like nothing was created except through him. So there are two categories. There's things that were created and things that were not created. And nothing was created except through him. And so he can't be created through himself. That doesn't work. And so he's in the not created category. He is God. And it's
Military
I mean,
category.
we're not wrong. He is a God. He's also the God. But he is a God.
No, it changes a
Yeah,
lot.
it is.
It
changes a lot. Changes the entire especially in
But-
the context that they present it.
yeah.
That little letter,
Yeah.
it is the presentation more than it is the letter, but the letter makes
Mm-hmm.
That is how you perceive it.
you haven't perceived it through their eyes yet.
Well, that's okay.
But yeah,
let me say this, it's an interesting conversation, and I love speaking with them because they are open to insight, and they are so willing to share their insight, and I find that to be one of the best learning experiences.
Mm-hmm.
We've had like
I always invite them in.
There's nothing like,
It's a mess, come on in.
well, and nothing will solidify your own, I don't know, doctrine, for lack of a better word, better than trying to explain it to somebody else.
Exactly, when
And-
they catch you in something you don't know how to answer, you will go find the answer. It gives you motivation to search. And if you
And-
search, you will find.
And I mean, it's that when you get hit with a question you can't answer, when you're people like you and me, that drives you to go find the answer. Some people get hit with that and go, oh, I don't know, I guess it doesn't work. And that's a reason to give up. But it's not necessarily like defending your faith, but just the idea of like even trying to explain, like if you're trying to explain to someone else who's very receptive, not antagonistic to it, but just like and it's like there's so many things that we have and people will be very dead set about, but to try to explain it we can't.
right.
And it's like there's so many people around here that if you ask them to explain why they are like a Clemson Tigers fan, they never went to Clemson, no one in their family's ever gone to Clemson, but man, they are dead set Tigers. It's like, why? And like, and it's like it's a school like so many other schools. They play football like everybody else. They play by the same rules with the same stuff. And it's like, why this one school? And like some people have good reasons. A lot of people are just like, because. And but
Jesus should never just be because.
But yeah, it's to explain something, to try to give a reason, and to, even if you're not talking to anybody else, but to just like, can I articulate this? Can I even explain to myself
That's really
what I believe and why?
Yes.
And-
Self-awareness of why you
Self-awareness.
believe what you believe.
But I get what you're saying about like, meeting with witnesses, practicing the art of articulating what you may have known for years in your heart and even in your head, but it's
But when it's
totally
questioned, you
different
don't know
when
how
you
to.
have to verbally present it and form it.
And the thing about not
You know.
knowing how to verbally present it is human nature causes us to be defensive, and that's the problem with most of the world, is
Very
the
true.
defensive nature that we get if we don't understand.
Especially in the world of social
And
media
a
now.
God that holds no mystery for you is a very small God. I've never understood why people think they can understand everything about God, because if you can, he's
You need a new
just
God.
not that big of a God.
Right.
I don't know. The mystery is part of what makes him God.
I mean, I think there's partial truth in almost anything. So
Well, that's where you call opinions.
well, that's fine. I mean, the world's full of opinions / partial truths.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, those partial truths, I mean, they kind of get you thinking. You think about it, like that's kind of where it starts.
Nobody falls for
There's a
something that
reason
doesn't
to
have
get
partial
the
truth to it.
whole truth in it.
So, but what I'm saying is those partial truths, when you're forced to actually, tease them out and figure out why something is or isn't like fully true, that's when you really learn and kind of understand.
You're
what-
absolutely right.
Right. So I mean, like
You test it.
You're testing
there's
yourself.
value in those
Yes.
partial truths.
All right. But I don't want to cut you off, but I'm going to cut this off because we're moving to the in the room portion of the night, and you can't hear the conversation going on anyway. So thank you for joining us, whoever did, and send a line, any questions you've got, and we'll see what we have next week.
We'll be right back.
Prayer.
Or at least you guys.
Sorry.